Hello, today I will be presenting on discipline and EBD, or emotional and behavioral disorders. So this video I thought gave a really good brief overview, so I'm going to go ahead and play it.
Hi, my name is Diamond Beckford. I'm a program supervisor for First Shift. I've been at Devereaux for 5 years.
My name is Anissa Hill. I'm a direct support professional, and I've worked for Devereaux for 2 years.
I work with girls that are between the ages of 12 to 18.
Some of the girls suffer from trauma, neglect, or just behavior issues.
They struggle with rules, following directions. Every day for them is a tough day.
We try to teach them how to regulate their emotions because that's the big thing. Whether it's over a relationship, a friendship, school, or mom telling you no, and you don't know how to accept it. So when they go out into the real world, they'll be able to cope.
A typical day here for me at Devereaux varies. I work 7 to 3, so that's waking the kids up, making sure they complete all their hygiene chores, room care. Then we transition them to meds. Some kids struggle with taking their medication, so it's a lot of prompting, kind of, getting them excited to say, hey, take your meds so you can have a good day. We go through the day, regular school day. We sit in the classrooms with them, provide, emotional behavioral support. Then they would come back to the unit and then transition to their room for reflection time, and then we would change shifts.
A typical day, I come into the unit, I always address the girls, ask them how their day in school was. Usually they do a reflection time. Then we would have a community meeting, come together as a community and just address how they're feeling. Then after.
So that's all I plan to share on that video. I think that it shows how children and adolescents with emotional and behavioral disorders can thrive with a heavily structured schedule, but not necessarily a heavily disciplined schedule. So that's just a little insight. So what are emotional and behavioral disorders? I honestly did not have a working definition in my vocabulary when I came into this project. And it's kind of hard to find one because this disorder can manifest itself in many ways, and it can be caused by many things. So, and it's a good working definition that I found is an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or other health factors, an inability to maintain or build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers, inappropriate types of feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, or a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. Now, in order to receive support, the emotional and behavioral distress must be something long-term that is causing academic problems for the student in question. Obviously, this is a very broad definition, but it's a very broad disorder, as I already stated. So I have a few stories of personal experience. So I'm not a very experienced educator, but I have had some early field experiences, and it's been really interesting to observe how other teachers interact with students that may have emotional and behavioral disorders. So one of those experiences was in a third grade classroom where I observed a student who was not receiving special ed support due to the fact that his parents did not want him to test for it. And in this classroom, he was heavily disciplined, and the school administration would often resort to suspending this third grade student. And throughout the time that I was in the placement, his behavior steadily got worse. Another thing that I think contributed to this was that the teacher used class dojos. The student was constantly reminded that he had like negative 15 points versus another child in the class had like 355. So as we go through this presentation, you'll see that that's not really a good way to motivate students with emotional and behavioral disorders. Another early field experience was with a student who had been categorized as a problem student in the school, and a lot of teachers knew of him. And he was in a reading intervention classroom that I was observing in, and I would often do one-on-one work with him, and I never had any issues with him. In fact, he never had any issues when I was in the classroom. And the instructor and I were kind of talking about this. We're like, it's weird because I wasn't really doing anything that would have influenced him to not act out. I was pretty, it was my first classroom experience. I was pretty hands off, except for the times where I was asked to work with him. And then he started really looking forward to it. And soon the instructor and I realized that he probably does not have an adult in his life who's never been a strict disciplinarian with him. And so just forming this positive relationship through forming this positive relationship with an adult, he was able to start learning and start to kind of respect what we were trying to do in his life. So there's two perspectives here. It's to discipline or not to discipline. Should we treat these students the same as other students, or should they be treated differently? So this to discipline side is saying that, well, we should treat all students the same. If Susie Q, who is a mainstream student, starts acting out in the classroom, she'll receive some sort of discipline. She may lose recess or whatever it may be. So is it equitable to not treat all these students the same? Well, as we established in our class time, I think it was last week, that treating students the same is not actually an equitable practice because some students just need more help. Also, some people would say that the teacher needs to discipline these students because teachers don't have the time to treat each student differently. In the earlier mentioned stories, the teachers would have 24 kids in their classroom at once. And so for the teacher, it's a huge ask to ask them to really invest in this one student relationship when they have 23 other kids to not only teach, but also keep safe and keep relationships with. But the other side of that is, well, teachers should always have a positive classroom environment where these students can thrive anyway, because it's just a good practice for students across the board. So my opinion is that these students have different needs than mainstream students, and by dealing with emotional distress that manifests itself in challenging behaviors, these students are already dealing with complex stressors in their day-to-day lives. And we as educators need to create positive connections with these students in order to help them realize that their educators are on their side. You don't know how many negative educational experiences this child might have had leading up to this point where they have found themselves in your classroom. So what I mean by that is that if this student with emotional distress around their education is exhibiting extreme behaviors in your class, you don't know how many strict disciplinarians they have come across in their education, even if they're young, that have somewhat contributed to their behavior manifesting itself in extreme ways. So perhaps they just need a positive adult connection. So I hope that this was helpful, and thank you for listening to my presentation.